The FF Plus, firstly, will not be assimilated by any other political party, and that goes for all the parties in the Government of National Unity. We will remain a niche party that will also stand for the rights of our community, the Afrikaner community, as well as other minorities. Secondly, we will remain committed to self-determination, and Mr. President, you know there are some unfinished business in that regard. The purpose of I've listened to some of the contributions made from some of the opposition parties. It is clear we do need a government of national unity. Thank you, sir.
So in this speech, right, Corne Mulder of FF Plus is actually informing the government of national unity that FF Plus still stands its grounds, in its fight for the Afrikaners and other minority, groups in South Africa, and also the fact that it's not going to submerge its vision to the vision of any other member of the government of national unity or the vision of the government of national unity itself, but it still stays pure in its pursuit of its objectives as a party. Let's listen to his really interesting speech, and I'll be back for a really powerful analysis on the prospects of the Cape independence that he speaks about in this speech.
Honorable Madam Speaker, Honorable President, and Honorable Deputy President, it's an honor and a privilege for me to participate in this debate today, Vote 1, the presidency. Mr. President, after the election, you decided that the way forward was the creation of a government of national unity. And that is what you have done, and it was the right thing to do. Your invitation to all was not unqualified. It was not an unqualified invitation. It was qualified by the statement of intent with clear founding principles. First one, respect for the Constitution, the Bill of Rights in its entirety, and the rule of law. Secondly, non-racialism, non-sexism, and a long list of other priorities. That was also the right thing to do. The Freedom Front Plus decided to join the government of national unity, and that was also the right thing to do. We are committed to assist and to make a success of the government of national unity and South Africa. But our commitment was also not unqualified. The FF Plus, firstly, will not be assimilated by any other political party, and that goes for all the parties in the government of national unity. We will remain a niche party that will also stand for the rights of our community, the Afrikaner community, as well as other minorities. Secondly, we will remain committed to self-determination, and Mr. President, you know there are some unfinished business in that regard. The purpose of the debate today is to do oversight over Vote 1, the presidency. Section 42(3) of the Constitution clearly states that the NA represents the people, and one of its functions is to scrutinize and oversee executive action. It is common cause that we currently do not have a specific portfolio committee that is doing oversight over Vote 1, the presidency. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition, Honourable Slope, referred to that as well today, and I think this is going to be an issue that will not go away. It will be something that we need to deal with. This matter was raised by the Zondo Commission into allegations of state capture, and one of the recommendations was that Parliament consider whether it would be desirable for it to establish a committee whose functions is oversight over acts or omissions by the President and the Presidency, which are not overseen by other committees. Section 92(2) of the Constitution also refers to that. Mr. President, you referred to all the number of things that are seated within the presidency, and obviously the work of the presidency has become more and more, and the presidency has become bigger and bigger. Just refer to Operation Vulindlela and other important things that you are dealing with. The priority of the Government of National Unity, as you correctly pointed out, is inclusive economic growth. It is our view that the executive and the presidency cannot do this alone. Never mind civil society, but we need all hands on deck. That includes the legislative branch of government as well. A year ago, a delegation of 6 senior members of Parliament travelled overseas to other jurisdictions to see if we can find a mechanism to do oversight over the presidency. What we need is not a normal portfolio committee. We need a unique, homegrown mechanism, not a portfolio committee. And let's be clear, the purpose of that mechanism cannot be to settle personal scores or to do attacks on the president's person as an individual. That's not the purpose of such kind of unique method that we need. There are other methods that one can do and deal with other issues. But what is necessary is that we do find a mechanism that can deal with these issues. For example, in the United Kingdom, they have what they call a liaison committee. It's a committee that consists of the chairpersons of all the different portfolio committees. And they interact with the president, in that case the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in terms of discussing policy, discussing, understanding where the policy that government formulates comes from, and interact. And if we are serious to say that we want all hands on deck, then it will also be in terms of policy and get all the different portfolios and the legislative branch on board. It can be done. It should be done. Mr. President, you will be in charge of this process in terms of the Government of National Unity. I've listened to some of the contributions made from some of the opposition parties. It is clear we do need a government of national unity. Thank you, sir.
Interesting, guys. What do you think? For me, one of the things that stood out in his speech is the fact that, the FF Plus wishes to maintain its purity, although it works together with the Government of National Unity to pursue wider growth and wider advantage for the greater South Africa. But in its pursuit of the Afrikaner community, the objective of the Afrikaner community and its other minority communities, which I really do not understand what he means by that. But, it's really interesting that they really have this really strong perspective in their position in Government of National Unity. And it's really tricky how the ANC would negotiate with that or compromise around that to have, especially not just the FF Plus, but every other party that make up the Government of National Unity accede to some parts of their objectives while remaining one solitary government that tries to achieve unity. It's a really difficult, I can already see, really difficult job to achieve. But anyway, I found this really interesting article from the IOL and IOL report from, I think, 2012 that actually interrogated this whole prospect of the Government of National Unity. And in this video, we're going to analyze the article and really try to put it in context of now the Government of National Unity. So the article was written in 2022, actually, just really recent anyway. But this was when, nobody had a clue or the idea that a certain Government of National Unity would evolve or erupt in South Africa's political trajectory. But now we have a Government of National Unity. Let's understand what the prospects as analyzed as of 2022 were in context to what, especially in Alan Winde's speech, as I put on this video 2 days ago. Alan Winde promises cooperation to the Government of National Unity, promises is loyal to the Government of National Unity. What does that entail for the Government of National Unity in light of the fact that he has been a major proponent of the Cape Independence movement? So let's really break this down carefully and try to understand what are the ramifications of an independent Cape in South Africa. So we know that it's plausible that Premier Alan Winde did not fully contemplate the ramifications when he announced that the Western Cape's government stance on Ukraine went in that light, right? While Winde is actually a staunch critique of Western Cape independence, his actions have So the report goes to say that, it's plausible, right, that Alan Winde, the Premier of the Western Cape, did not really contemplate the ramifications when he announced that the Western Cape has a certain stance on the Ukrainian issue, right? We could see how vociferous he was in trying to push the narrative that if Putin steps into the Western Cape, that, the Western Cape would arrest President Putin and send him back to the court, the Criminal Court of Justice, as he was actually, summoned sometime earlier. But anyway, the report actually goes on to say that while Alan Winde is actually a staunch critique of Western Cape independence, his actions have inadvertently supported the movement considerably. The issue of Western Cape secession is predominantly viewed through a legal lens, specifically the de jure aspect, which actually is what the law dictates, right? And so Professor Pierre De Vos and actually Advocate Paul Hoffman actually raised concerns regarding the constitutional feasibility of Cape independence. None of these the professor and the advocates contend that it is illegal, but rather they highlight the constitutional requirement of a 2/3 majority in the National Assembly to amend the constitution. So while the MK party now, we know that the MK party with leadership of Dr. John Schloppe in the parliament needs also a 2/3 majority to be able to amend the constitution to favor the hegemony of African law, as he speaks about, and he criticizes Roman Dutch law. The Western Cape independence movement also needs a 2/3 of the majority in the National Assembly to be able to amend the constitution to their favor. Now we know that apartheid did not end, right, according to this report, because Parliament voted for its secession. Okay, for its cessation, that's it, its end, thereabout. But Parliament's vote was a result of apartheid already being effectively dismantled, okay? And so the de facto reality and subsequent de jure acknowledgement were aligned through a largely symbolic referendum. Apartheid had ended, irrespective of the referendum's outcome. Now, many political analysts, they perceived the Cape independence in a similar manner, considering not on the legalities, but also on the inevitable vacuum that will be created by withdrawing by a withdrawal from the South African state, or by a withdrawing South African state. Okay, Dr. Plus Corne, we know him very well, who is the chief executive of the Institute of Race Relations. He actually posits that South Africa will transform into an enclave state. What does an enclave state mean? It's a state where citizens will insulate themselves from the state and provide their own services. Okay, so that's Plus Corne, his position, in the analysis of this whole trajectory for the future of South Africa. The head of policy at the Democratic Alliance, at the time, head of policy, Gwenya, he actually discusses the emergence of a parallel privately funded state. Okay, so there will be a national state, a South Africa state, and then a parallel privately funded state, and that will be probably a formation of basis and of a new kind of nation, so to speak. A public law professor at the University of Pretoria, Professor Koos Malan, he actually has highlighted that policing has effectively been privatized through security firms, indicating that the state has actually failed to fulfill its fundamental role of protecting its citizens. Now, in private discussions with the Cape Independence Advocacy Group, CIAG, a senior political figure suggested that Cape independence does not necessitate a reform. Instead, there should be a government in waiting, which is like the Western Cape government, okay, which is ready to assume control if the South African government either collapses or deviates significantly from constitutional norms, making the Western Cape's independence an act of defending the constitution rather than attacking it. Let's go back again. I think I love that point. It says that there should be, instead of the Cape independence movement needing a referendum, this professor argues that there should be a government in waiting, which is like the Western Cape government, which will be ready to assume control, probably if the government of national unity, for example, collapses, or if the government of national unity deviates from constitutional norms, which then makes the Western Cape's independence an act of defending the constitution rather than attacking it. So you see, this is a really tricky place where the GNU is. So if for any reason the GNU fails to uphold the constitution of South Africa, the Western Cape should have a government in waiting that automatically, ignites or, catalyzes the constitution of the Western Cape and the movement of the Western Cape independence, as a means of protecting South Africa's constitution, thereby having us see emergence of what might be called the real constitution of South Africa, but from the perspective and the hegemony of the Western Cape. So that's the trajectory we're likely going to see. These are kind of like scenarios anyway. So the report actually ascertains that the scenarios are increasingly becoming a reality, and that it is important, right, that in the West, it is important to remember that in the Western Cape, the majority of the voters have never supported the ANC. So what becomes of this now? If the majority of the voters in the Western Cape haven't supported the ANC for a long time, what happens now that we have a government of national unity where the ANC seems to be in bed with the DA, and they seem to be cooperating on all levels? Because when you even listen to the speeches in the parliament. For now, though, there's a lot of support for the ANC, for President Ramaphosa's ANC, by many DA members. So what then happens if, for example, that support declines, especially since we know that the support for the ANC has been at very low ebbs in the Western Cape? What then, happens with all this? It says that consequently, an ANC national government only holds legitimacy in the Western Cape, okay, if it has the consent of those who voted against it. Let's go back again. It says consequently, that's now as a result of the fact that a majority of the voters in the Western Cape have never supported the ANC. The result of that is that an ANC national government only holds legitimacy in the Western Cape if it has the consent of those who voted against it. Right? So, in other words, because a majority of the voters in the Western Cape do not support the ANC, categorically do not support the ANC, these non-supporters now have to give consent to the ANC to rule the Western Cape. All right, the ANC cannot impose rules or laws or policies on the Western Cape at will, because a majority of the supporters in the Western Cape do not support the ANC. But for that to happen, it has to be by consent by these people who are non-supporters of the ANC. And the GNU now opens the fora, it opens the window for that to happen, since the GNU, now has incorporated the Democratic Alliance to support its, move to actually carry out the certain policies for the nation of South Africa. That consent naturally comes, and we could hear that from Alan Winde's speech in Parliament, where he actually supported and vowed loyalty to the ANC government, but on the premise that they also have a fair share of their own visions from the Government of National Unity. So we see what's really going on now with the Government of National Unity. Really, really tricky place. Anyway, the report goes on to say that thus far, the ANC national government maintains legitimacy in the Western Cape, but this could change rapidly. Due to actions of a national government it did not elect, the Western Cape nearly exhausted its water supply. The province has also experienced extensive power outages, which has not only inconvenienced residents, but has also exacerbated economic decline, leading to runaway unemployment and its inevitable consequence, which is what? Poverty. The police service also in the region is actually in disarray, leaving the region virtually helpless amidst one of the highest murder rates in the world. Additionally, Western Cape is overwhelmed by economic migrants, of course, who are illegally occupying the land on a vast scale, placing unsustainable demands on local resources and infrastructure. Now, in response to this, the Western Cape is progressively distancing itself from the national government. This is as of 2022. Okay, but now that in 2024, from May the 29th, ever since the ANC lost its majority, and now we saw an emergence of a Government of National Unity in South Africa, we could likely see the Western Cape progressively getting closer now to the national government. All right, because now Government of National Unity, and not just a national government dominated by ANC rule. Now, we know that the Western Cape already generates a portion of its own electricity and is planning to end its reliance on the national grid, which is Eskom. The same with Orania as well. This is actually also captured in a video I made also on Orania, where Karel Boshoff and I think the other Afrikaner leader actually speaks about this. Now, in collaboration with the city of Cape Town, the province has actually launched its own water security program, reducing dependence on the National Department of Water and Sanitation. So when the likes of Action SA's vice president spoke about how, everyone is focused on load shedding, but a major crisis that's going to hit South Africa soon is water shedding, the Western Cape might already be, protected from that. Now, we see that the city of Cape Town has also established an auxiliary police service. Alan Winter spoke this in a speech I listened to him speak about, where he spoke that the Western Cape is still pursuing devolution of powers. This was in the regime of, Becky Tele, right? When, you know, a lot of complaints were actually going that Becky Tele is only a minister of, you know, attending funerals. This was from Chris Pappas. But as at that time, the Western Cape had already fighting for a devolution of power in terms of policing to provide its own local policing service. So we know that City of Cape Town had actually also established an auxiliary police service. And additionally, Western Cape had actually initiated development of its own foreign policy. So that's why Alan Winde was really vociferous when he spoke about the fact that if Putin steps his foot in the Western Cape, that he will be arrested and sent to the courts, which many thought that that would be a, you know, declaration of war with Russia. But anyway, the significance of the development of the fact that the Western Cape has now its own foreign policy as of 2022 should not be underestimated. And I'm sure it still exists there somewhere, even though now the government of national unity has taken root. The fact that the Western Cape has its own foreign policy is something that shouldn't be underestimated. And the universal accepted definition of statehood, you know, as outlined in the Montevideo Convention of 1993, it says that statehood, to ascertain a statehood or to establish a statehood in the modern world in which we live today, as according to this Montevideo Convention of 1993, it demands that the pursuers of statehood, you know, they must have an independent sovereign state that possesses a permanent population and a defined territory, and also a government, and also the capacity to conduct international relations. Now, the Western Cape already fulfills all of these criteria, as you can see. It already has a defined territory. It appears to have a government, right? It already seems to have an ability to conduct international relations. So we see that these guys are ready to leave South Africa at any instant. The Western Cape has a permanent population with its own voters' roll. It has clearly defined borders. It has a provincial government. And previously, it lacked the capacity to conduct international relations. However, it has assumed this capacity. And now it constitutes a textbook example of a de facto independence in a direct challenge to the national government stance, right? That's as at when we had the national government of the ANC. But now that it's in the government of Western Cape, I think that will pipe low for a while. But nonetheless, the Western Cape formally condemned Russia as at the time when the ANC, you know, were kind of like pursuing peace. But we could tell in a way or ascertain that Russia, the ANC government was in a way pro-Russia, especially with relations with BRICS. As at that time, the Western Cape had already condemned Russia in its attack of Ukraine, clearly positioning itself as pro-Ukrainian, and also identified Russia as the aggressor and a violator of international law. Now, also, the Western Cape also banned Russian diplomats, like I said earlier, and their staff from all meetings and functions that it organized. And it further demonstrated its newfound international capacity by formally engaging with the Ukrainian ambassador. All right. And now the ANC then recognized the significance of these actions with furious responses accusing Premier Alan Winde of crossing the line and running a parallel state. This was as at the time when the National Secretary General at the time of the ANC spoke about this. I remember it was a really heated episode between the ANC and the Western Cape at the time. Also at the time, spokesperson of ANC then, Sifiso Mtweni, actually addressed Premier Winde as stating that provinces do not enjoy federal status and that Alan Winde should take note of that fact, and that matters of international relations are managed and driven at the national level, you see. So the last comment here by this spokesperson of the ANC at the time, she said, one provincial minority government cannot override nor define itself outside of the overall governance of South Africa. And so the report argues that this statement is actually interesting because in the context of the Western Cape, the government of the Western Cape is not a minority government. The Democratic Alliance has actually held an outright majority for 3 consecutive terms and has a clear mandate to govern. Now, conversely, in the Western Cape, the ANC is a minority party. And despite receiving only 28.6% of the vote, which fell to 20.4% as at 2021, the ANC determined national policy that the Western Cape government was obliged to follow and manages most major portfolios in the province. So the ANC as at 2022 still manage a lot of portfolios in the Cape Town. Now, Premier Winde as at 2022 was implementing the wishes of the Western Cape electorate. But in contrast, the ANC was insisting that Winde disregard the preferences of the Western Cape voters and adhere to ANC directives instead. Now, this situation is what encapsulates the essence of Cape independence, empowering Western Cape voters to be governed in accordance with their own democratic wishes rather than in spite of them. And so the implications for the government of national unity now are still really undetermined, because it's really clear that the Western Cape and Western Cape independence seems to have all that it needs to ascertain independence or pursue secession. But now, with the emergence of a government of national unity, could we see a piping down of that for the next 4 or 5 years? But in the case of the MK party or the EFF coming to power, where probably a 2/3 majority in the parliament would then be able to pursue a reconstitutionalization and set the agenda for the Western Cape or the Cape independence movement to be the ones who protect the constitution of South Africa as it was originally instituted, thereby leading to a natural secessionist drive by the Western Cape, and then we see 2 parallel governments in that space called South Africa. Is that something we should be closely looking out for? Those are stories for another day. But this has actually been a really interesting analysis both for me, and I really hope you enjoyed it. The prospects of Western Cape independence. What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments.